course in organizational behavior, which is really crucial because notice the title is organizational behavior, right? You know, last week we talked about how we've created corporations by granting them agency. Okay, well, so agency for the corporation, which means that a corporation, depending on where it's located, what kind of industry it's in, whether it's new and small or old and big, they exhibit different structures. They function differently, and then there's just behavioral differences. What I'm going to do today is, well, I'm going to leave that that subject uh, for someone else's expertise. But what I'm going to suggest today is that we focus purely on the human element. Just why not? We're humans, and we're gonna approach this in the following way. This is going to be sort of more of a psychological discussion, as well as some pretty powerful economics a little bit later on. But again, I want to keep the focus on uh, human beings, and especially, our skill sets and how we earn money, how we maintain our relevance, because everything's changing so rapidly, that we're all worried. Me too, that every time you learn something today, it's obsolete tomorrow. But I think a lot of the concerns about the future of work, uh, which would also be an appropriate title, I suppose, for our discussion today. Um, I think a lot of the fears about the future of work are rather greatly overblown, and we'll discuss that and see. Um, Let me do something mandatory, which is to show show a PowerPoint. Okay, that's me. We don't need that. Um, read what I put in yellow there, because that's the whole purpose for putting that slide there. When when we approach the subject of education, like say bachelor's degree in business or bachelor's in economics, um, for some reason, we human beings tend to approach it by focusing on learning specific skills. And after all, that's the way our schools are structured, it's the way our general education system's structured. It focuses on imparting skills. And then the idea is you go out into the marketplace and you apply these skills and you accumulate experience, and then you know by magic one day you wake up and you're an expert, and that's kind of a natural mental progression. And that's why I've listed all of those things there, because we really do have to have these skills if we're going to operate in whatever capacity within the broad world, we'll say, of business and of economics, whether that's business and economics and the social sphere, the private business sphere, the government sphere. Um, we need certain skills, and we certainly need at least these skills. But where we make a
Excuse
mistake, I
me.
believe, yes,
I-
nobody can hear
If
me.
we are, yeah, if
Oh,
we,
okay. Hang on,
yeah,
hang on. Oh,
we're
there's
supposed
some.
to
I'm
see
getting.
something.
Well, okay. Let's do that. Let me see what happened. Okay, good. Hey, I got some. Thank you. I was getting this weird message, and of course, I'm using somebody else's computer, and that's always uh, difficult. But here's the good news. The good news is that you missed that introductory slide. I'm tired of my introduction. Okay, sorry. So the reason I picked that stupid looking red toolbox there is to just make a point that we approach education, which we should, by thinking about acquiring skills. The mistake we make, I believe, is that we focus too much on skills, which really are just tools, right? They're just tools in a toolbox. You have a business idea you want to implement. You got some problem you got to solve. Somebody comes to me and says, Paul, what's the value of my factory? Well, you got to reach in the toolbox and pull out some tools. Somebody comes to me if I'm a marketing branding specialist and says, hey, I come up with a brand and help promote it. Well, I'm going to have to reach into the toolbox, start grabbing some of the skills and a lot of sub skills that I don't list here in the area of marketing, in the area of of branding. So, but I think when it comes to being labor, right, us, or organizing, coordinating, leading, employing labor, is we tend to focus too much on the specific skills, these technical skills, and we focus on it so much that if you think about it, we tend to equate human beings with their skills. And I kind of think psychologically that's a mistake when it comes to the whole world of human resources. Look, I am not an economist. Okay. My my mother was not an accountant. Okay. I'm a guy who has certain skills that you could describe as being within the realm of, economics. I have done economic research and I publish economic articles. Fine, but those are tools and they're applications of the tools. But I am not an economist. I'm me. And this guy over here, he's he's not a CFO and a CFA and a CPA. He's a guy or a woman, you know. By the way, guy's a generic American term for men and women. So he's just some guy who happens to have specific skills, maybe quite advanced skills in the area of finance and accounting. But he's not a CFO. He's a human being. And that, I think, as we go forward, you might see that's a source of some issues in the way we appreciate and compensate human beings within our market economy. Okay, so what is if you're not your skills? Okay, this is I like this slide. Yeah, it's kind of artistic. So if you're not your skills, if I'm not my skills, then you have to ask this question: who am I? And this is where we get to what I think is a much, much more important box of tools, a much, much more important skill set. And it's what I like to call the psychological skill set. Because human beings, we are psychological and emotional creatures first, and accountants second, right? So so if you're thinking, gosh, where am I going to go in terms of you know income earning activity? What kind of a career do I want? What kind of work do I want to do? What kind of an impact do I want to make on society? Uh, um, you need to do a little self evaluation and ask yourself, what's my psychological skill set? And I've jotted a few down here. And the first thing I'm going to do is go boom, boom, and I'm going to put those two up simultaneously. And the reason I put those two up simultaneously is that we too often conflate the two. And I believe, in business schools, in the market economy in general, I believe we greatly over exaggerate the importance of entrepreneurs. Okay. I'm not saying they're not important, but I think we overemphasize the importance of the entrepreneur and the entrepreneurial spirit. And we tend to confuse entrepreneurs and innovators. They're actually two very, very different psychological skill set. Think about this. Thomas Edison, the guy with the light bulb. Thomas Edison was both an innovator and an entrepreneur. He was an innovator because he created the world's first modern research laboratory, and he innovated at least 10,000 times, according to the records, before he figured out the best way to make a light bulb, the little tungsten filament in a light bulb. He was both an innovator and an entrepreneur. Steve Jobs was an innovator and an entrepreneur. But, in between there, you're going to have a hard time finding someone really successful who's both. So think about this. You have Edison, who was both. But then at the same time, you had a guy named Westinghouse. Westinghouse was an entrepreneur, but he was not an innovator. So what he did is he teamed up with a man named Tesla. Tesla was not an entrepreneur, but he was a genius, brilliant innovator. And the combination of the skill set, psychological and tools wise, of a guy like Westinghouse and the psychological and skill set of a guy like Tesla, when they combined, they defeated Edison. They had a huge, long, expensive war as to whether the world would run on AC electric or DC electric. They promoted AC, they won. And I think the reason they prevailed is, two heads are better than one. Okay. So I believe that for every one entrepreneur, there are actually, I'm not going to throw a number out, but a much larger number of innovators. If you're a chemist working at a pharmaceutical company, you are innovating all the time. Innovation is your job. It's what you have to do. That's why you're in the chemistry lab of a pharmaceutical company, because you're supposed to innovate new drugs or innovate improvements to existing drugs. So what you'll find is the main psychological difference here is entrepreneurs tend to not be risk averse. They do quite the opposite. They tend to thrive in risk. Okay, when I think of all the entrepreneurs I know, including myself on occasion, they tend to thrive in risk. They see a challenge and immediately turn it into an opportunity, right? They tend to be optimistic. To them, challenges are opportunities. But innovators are often rather introverted people, okay, like Tesla. They're rather introverted people, but their work is essential, and the sort of the skill set's a little different. So one takeaway is, if you think you're much more inclined to the entrepreneurial side, find yourself an innovator to team up with. Okay, find your Tesla. Well, good luck with that. Here's a skill set that I've come to appreciate. When I say skill sets, I mean, human beings, okay? And, I'm speaking holistically here. And I've come to appreciate implementers in my life just enormously. And whenever I build any kind of a team, I always make sure I have someone that fits the profile of the implementer. An implementer is literally the person that, takes the idea of the entrepreneur and the innovations of the innovator, especially if they're working together, and they literally make it happen. Okay, they're the ones who go out and implement your ideas. Most entrepreneurs are not good managers. They're not good implementers. They're entrepreneurs. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just saying, life is like a spectrum. Okay. So, for example, I consider myself to be more of an innovator than an entrepreneur. And I consider myself to be more of an innovator than an implementer. Okay. I can implement, I have, but the projects and companies and things I do, if I can team up with an implementer, someone who has those, and again, they're like psychological skills because we all know mathematics and statistics, but someone who just knows how to get things organized and implemented and take your dream and make it happen. That's We don't quite focus enough on that. Like in business school, we focus on on being entrepreneurial and being innovative, but we tend to kind of step over this crucial step of who's going to implement your dream into some dollars and cents reality. Um, if you want the trains to run on time, you better hire a specialist, right? I mean, a specialist, not just in logistics and all of the skills, right, that go with logistics, but preferably someone who's a specialist in railroad logistics as opposed to airplane logistics. And we we tend to we tend to sort of underappreciate specialists. Okay, every business must have a licensed accountant. I don't know any country on earth where you can have a business without a licensed accountant. Okay, the accountant, the human being we call the accountant is more than just an accountant, but they are certainly a specialist, and we need those specialist skills. So an entrepreneur and or an innovator with a great idea, if they're able to find an implementer, okay, now they can actually start doing something, okay? And but once they start doing something because the implementer is organized and creative and uh, they're still going to need some highly trained specialists, people who are the most comfortable picking one area, maybe one area and full little sub areas, and just focusing on that their whole career. I mean, all their education and experience and expertise is just focused on just this one thing. And they're not entrepreneurs. They won't go give a TED talk over at Unit City because that's not who they are. But it doesn't mean that they're less valuable than the entrepreneur who can do a 7-minute pitch and talk someone into investing money. Jay, we tend to kind of glorify the entrepreneur, and we tend to kind of not glorify the implementers and the specialists. I will guarantee you that if I had tried to be the entrepreneur and the innovator and the implementer and the specialist in any of my business activities, I would have failed just miserably and completely. Because these are not just different tools in a toolbox; they're different psychological skill set. I am just way, way, way far too energetic and loquacious, and I got too many ideas. And if you hire me to make the trains run on time, we're all going to be late because I mean, if it was like life or death, Paul, make the trains run on time or we'll kill you. Okay, okay, I'll make the trains run on time. But will I be happy? Well, no. Unhappy employees are unproductive employees. So we'd get by, but everybody would still be complaining about the service. So I'm not the guy because I have strong psychological skills as we all do, but it's not really in the area of being an implementer. Okay. Now I am a specialist in valuation methodologies and the like. But again, I don't I don't introduce myself as a valuer, an appraiser, a financial analyst. business value or no, because I just happen to have a lot of experience using certain tools in the toolbox that you must use with high levels of expertise if you're going to go tell a multi-billion dollar company what their factory is worth. You know, so there is that. Now, here's a I'm putting these in a specific order because you know an entrepreneur just has an idea. An innovator helps that idea achieve at least some intangible reality. The implementer figures out how to do it. The specialists come in, okay, as needed. Okay, somebody's got to do the coding, etc. Um, but once you get a business up and running, you very quickly need the most underappreciated psychological skill set, which is the manager. Okay. And I don't mean old school type of management. I mean, I use the term manager on purpose because I'm now going to say I hate that term because nowadays, this is not the 1950s. Nowadays, we don't recognize the skill set of manager. We recognize the skill set of leadership, leader. Okay. So if you want, you could separate managers and leaders. I put them both up there, but if it was up to me, I would just delete the idea of a manager. You need leaders. Leaders motivate people, and they help organize people and motivate people, and they they know how to combine these psychological skill sets together in order to get the kind of dynamic human team you have to have. Um, think about this. If if someone comes and gives you some project for a class or whatever, your natural first reaction is to say, "Well, I'm gonna need some team members," and you're going to choose people that you like, people that are like you, and you get along well, you work well together. Well, yeah, but if you're an entrepreneurial person, sort of psychologically kind of leaning that way, well, presumably all your best friends are going to be kind of like leaning that way, and so you'll end up with an unbalanced team. So rather than looking for uh, uh, individuals per se, especially ones you may know or like, look instead for people with the technical skill set and the psychological skill set to fill these incredibly crucial roles. Because if you don't have an implementer and a specialist and a manager who just does all the day-to-day stuff, right? Deals with all the legal and financial and all that kind of stuff. If you and if you don't yourself or within your organization have individuals with leadership skills, well, you're going to build a two-legged stool, not a right. You're gonna build a three-legged horse. You're just not probably three-legged horse. Okay, you're not going to have the right kind of balance. So when I organize staffing for a company, or when I'm putting together nowadays, a team for a specific project, I have a lot of individuals I know, and and they all have lots of technical skills. They all have different psychological skill set. And then, kind of like a football manager, you sit back and you say, okay, for this particular client, for this particular project, I need, colleague numbers 2, 7, and 12. Okay, because between those three, I've got these necessary sort of skill set, technical and psychological, to come together and to do all of this. Now that's less important than the kind of work I do, but it's really crucial if you're going to produce and sell something, right? right? If you're going to try to grow a business, expand a product line, you really are not going to succeed if you don't have a team that fills these psychological as well as technical skill set. Oh, here's a chat note. Okay. All right. I think we're good. I think it was a message that said we're being recorded. What a surprise. I put this slide up. I won't dwell on this, but I'd be remiss. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out my deeply held, sincere belief that you can go anywhere in this world and be successful in business without sacrificing your ethics. And let me tell you, I've had to work in South Africa during the apartheid era when I was in the US government, and Zimbabwe. Ooh, that was tough because I didn't exactly approve of the system. I've had to work in China and Mongolia and you name it, where Russia once upon a time, and you run into lots and lots of ethical challenges. And what you what you have to do, I think, to be successful is you just got to figure out what is your personal threshold, as it were. I believe that if you, no matter what sector you're working in, no matter what kind of a job, what kind of a business, I really believe you can't go wrong if you make sure that part of your personal brand is this idea of not just being smart, just being efficient, and clever, and entrepreneurial, or whatever, but that you really are reliable. Okay, you mean what you say what you mean. You really do have a rather low threshold of toleration for things that are not ethical, honest, integrous. I mentioned this last week, and where I said that because I started work over here in the '90s, I can assure you ethics was not the strong suit of the business and government sectors of Ukraine in the 1990s. Okay, and so I really did take a decision that I just could not operate except one certain way, and in that one certain way cost me 9 out of 10 clients. But the clients I did get, they're still with me 30 years later. And and they pay a lot more money than bad clients I didn't want to work with. So in the long run, I ended up with a tiny, even though I was one of the first appraisers in Ukraine, I I was one of the first people doing appraisal work. I ended up with a tiny little market share, but it's been sustainable and profitable all these many years. Now, if I had, relaxed my ethical standards, I may have made more money. I may have had more clients. I don't know. I don't know. But, I figured out for myself, and everybody needs to figure this out for themselves. Um, what's their ethical threshold? And I think you know, the lower your threshold is, meaning your willingness to accept unethical behavior, I think the better off you are. Okay, no more preaching. Take a look at this cartoon here. I love this one. You guys, I hope, do know who the Grim Reaper is. Okay, and I'll tell you, even if you do know, in European folklore, the Grim Reaper, this guy in the hoodie, carries around his saw, and he harvests souls. He's the Grim Reaper. Okay. Um, and so the ethical dilemma that this guy has is it says here, blades sharpen while you wait. And this is subtle on different levels. If I was this guy, do you know what I'd be thinking? Am I next? Am I next? Am I sharpening this blade so you could go reap some grim souls somewhere else, or or did you actually come for me? Um, okay, let me try to make this a little more serious. You're a bricklayer and you're going to build a brick wall, and your supervisor comes to you and says, "Look, I'm under big pressure from the boss to keep costs low so we have a higher profit margin. So I want you, the bricklayer, to use this cement that I bought to build your wall." Now you look at that cement and being an expert, you say, well, wait a minute. If I build this wall with that cement, it's going to fall down in 2 years. And your supervisor says, we only have a 1 year warranty. Well, that's kind of an ethical problem now, isn't it? I don't know what I would do. Well, actually, I do know what I would do. Um, here's one that's more relevant to you, uh, and it's a very, very common ethical dilemma. You work as an insurance adjuster for a big insurance company, right? An insurance adjuster takes a claim, whether it's medical, like say medical insurance, or my house burned down, doesn't matter. They take an insurance claim and they decide, will the claim be approved, and if so, for how much money? These decisions really impact the lives of the people filing the claim, right? They had their house burned down, they had a heart attack. Okay, these are pretty serious issues. But if you're working as an insurance adjuster, I guarantee you will be under pressure to deny claims and reduce payout, because that's just the way those employment contracts work. Okay. It's kind of an unwritten rule. The lower you pay out on claims, and you do it all perfectly legally, finding all kinds of sneaky little holes to squeeze through. And, the more claims you deny and the less money you pay out, the bigger your Christmas bonus. And that's just the way that industry works. They'll deny it, but that's a really serious ethical dilemma. And regardless of whether you're sort of an entrepreneurial minded person, or someone who wants to be a great specialist in financial forecasting, um, you, we all still have to develop this idea of ethical behavior and figure out how to navigate. And it's hard, life is not black and white, it's gray. Everything in life is gray. Okay. Well, almost everything when you think about it. Okay. Most things are gray, not black, not white, not right, not wrong. They're in there. And it's kind of a gray space, and it's hard for you to navigate. But through time, you have to decide, who you are and how you're going to navigate to achieve your objectives, be successful in life, be successful in your business, but still somehow navigate that gray area. And it's tough. It's really tough. All right. So I've been about ranting of psychological skill sets, and building teams based less on very specific skills and more on psychological skills, not technical. But now the issue is, well, am I going to have a job in the future? Everybody nowadays is more worried about um, the future of work than I was at your age. Because when I got out of various graduate schools in the 70s, my only concern is, could I find a job? It never occurred to me that I wouldn't be able to find a job because jobs were disappearing. Because in the 1970s, jobs were not disappearing. But, today, jobs disappear just like crazy. I mean, if we made a list of job titles today and we compared it to job titles 20 years ago, the two lists would be very, very different. The two lists would be very, very different because that's this pace of change. And it's kind of scary and it's kind of hard to keep up. Okay, so let's talk about labor now, not as a psychologist, which I prefer. Let's talk about labor like economists would. Okay, and it's not boring. Economics is not boring. Okay, 50 years ago, labor was classified by every government in a very simplistic way because the economy was much more simplistic. So we had agricultural labor and manufacturing labor, and we had rural labor and we had urban labor. And obviously, those categories today they're not relevant. They don't make any sense. One way to look at labor, which I have found very useful, and I think I referenced Professor Robert Reich of UC Berkeley, who was talking about this long, long time ago. Um, it's really useful, again, whether we're going to create a business or lead a business, right? It's really useful to look at labor in these three categories: routine production, in-person services, and, spoiler alert, all of you and me, symbolic analysts. That's what we are, right? That's what we are. 100 years ago, there were almost no symbolic analysts. Nowadays, we're drowning in symbolic analysts because economies evolve. All right, look, when we talk about routine production, you'll notice we're talking about labor across all industries, right? Manufacturing, construction, transportation. And although I do not like these terms skilled and unskilled, highly skilled, poorly skilled, I'm going to use them anyway on purpose to make a point that this idea of skilled and poorly skilled really doesn't make that much sense when you think about it. But we still tend to classify labor that way. But it's so subjective, right? I mean, what's skilled, what's unskilled? All right, this idea of routine production labor, transportation. If if I'm if I'm flying on an Airbus airplane with 250 other people, um, the pilot is part of the transportation industry. And I really hope that pilot is highly skilled. I mean, I really, really hope that pilot is really highly skilled, which he are. But they're still doing the same kind of routine production that a person in a factory is doing, right? Flying an airplane is routine, which is why the pilot flies on takeoff and flies on landing, and in between it's all automatic. They just sit back. So it's routine, and if it's routine, it can be automated, right? It's going to take a while to automate airplane pilots, but we're automating taxis. We're automating metro lines. Okay, you'd be surprised. You get on a subway train, and sometimes there's literally no conductor there. or they're sitting there, but only in the case of an emergency will they jump up and take control. Otherwise, it's all automated. They're skilled highly, but it's routine. Um, if think about manufacturing, we tend to think of manufacturing as being sort of eh, old school, old school, unskilled. I mean, compared to people who are computer programmers. But if the factory of today is a different thing entirely than a factory of even 20 years ago, um, if you are working at a factory and you're personally responsible for a dozen large automated spot welding robots that are spot welding the frame of an automobile as it comes down the line, you're really highly skilled. Okay. Now, it used to be that you and thousands of people like you would do the welding yourself. But because welding is a routine production, it was one of the first things in the industrial world to be automated. So now instead of 100 welders, you got one or two people, and they are very highly skilled because they're managing this robotic welding uh, piece of the assembly line. They're maintaining these very expensive, complex machines and repairing them and so on and so forth. So so this is why it doesn't make any sense to try to classify people according to categories like manufacturing or construction, but to categorize people according to whether what they're doing is routine or not. If it's routine, it is at very high risk of being automated. Um, In-person services, this is different because if you're a maid, a barber, for example, you cannot get your hair cut or your nails done or your roof your busted toilet, the leak in your roof. Those things cannot be repaired by automation. It requires a human being to come out and lay hands upon your broken plumbing, cut your hair with their hands, right? So clean the hotel room. Okay, so there's still this category of labor that requires a human being to be there. These are going to be the last jobs, the least likely to be automated, but they are being automated. Okay. Um, Look at where it says doctors and teachers, and just kind of hold this thought for a second. Um, until 10 years ago, realistically, recently, we'll say, you had to go see a doctor like face to face so they could take your temperature. And you had to go to a classroom to come face to face live and in person with faculty members in order to, discuss educational things. Um, but to kind of hold that thought because you're probably a step ahead of me. Obviously, things are things are changing. All right. I told you already, spoiler alert, symbolic analysts. Um, that's my definition of a symbolic analyst. These are just producers of intangible assets through the manipulation of symbols. That's who we are. Or that's what we do. We're not lawyers and economists and architects. We're symbolic analysts. An accountant manipulates symbols called numbers in order to produce, income statements and balance sheets. And those numbers, the way they organize them, tell a story, right? Profitability, loss, success, failure. Lawyers manipulate symbols we call words, and torture us with contracts that don't make any sense and laws and regulations and the like. So this is who we are. Now, if we were discussing this even just 10 years ago, I'd say the probability of symbolic analysts losing their jobs are very low. Okay. I mean, it's one thing to automate the welding function in a automobile factory, but it's really hard to automate, lawyers and accounting functions. So, but that's all changed now. And now we have to think about our technical skill set, our psychological skill set, and then we have to think about, okay, what's the probability that I'm going to actually have job losses from automation as we go forward? Everybody's paranoid about this, and again, spoiler alert, it uh, don't worry that much. Okay, the probability of job loss if you're doing anything routine is high. All right. Like an insurance adjuster. Lots of AI programs now can adjudicate, if you will, um, uh, uh, the amount of insurance payment that will be made, or whether the claim should be rejected and why. Because on page 399 of the contract, small print, there's this little loophole. An AI program can find that faster than you can. So whether you're a basic factory worker or, and we're coming up to this, a computer coder. Okay. But I don't get ahead of myself. The if any work that you're doing is routine, there's a high probability it will be automated. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that those jobs go away. It more likely means two things. The job continues to exist, that activity we call the job continues to exist, but there's less of them. So there used to be 100 guys doing welding, and now there's two guys because we automated. Um, and the job itself can be, and almost always is, it's self-modified. So, automation, by the way, I'm using this automation in a very, very broad sense. Okay, call this AI, call this whatever you want, but it's just basically replacing human labor with something non-human, whatever you want to call it, an algorithm, AI, it doesn't matter. So the probability that your job is going to change is about 100%. And based on what I've seen, there's a lot of examples. I would say a majority of that change is actually enhancing the job of the person who's subject to automation. If my job requires me to do 10 things, but three of them are just kind of mindless routine things, well, fine, this can be automated and it enhances my job. Maybe I'll get paid more money, maybe because I'll be more productive, and I won't be burdened by this boring stuff. So there is job enhancement, but there's also just straight up job loss. Okay. And this is when you stop and think as an economist, a prime minister, anybody, you stop and think of the societal impact of job loss. It's obviously really, really serious stuff. Okay. If you look all over the world, there's so much social unrest that is the direct result of too many people who were employed in too many routine production jobs, And those jobs have been reduced or disappeared altogether. And now they're stuck. They don't have jobs. They don't have prospects for jobs. And, this is the source of a lot of social issues. Um, these in-person services, 10 years ago, I would have put low, probability low. But, today it's at least moderate that there's going to be some job losses from automation. Um, you know, but okay, let me give you an example because, life is gray. I'm a doctor, and it used to be that people would come in and see me, and the only time I ever worked with a patient is when I saw them face to face. Well, now those patients have uh, 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 um, glucose monitors that are sending data 24/7 to my office, where my highly skilled nurse, who's also now a statistician as well as a nurse, is collecting this data on whatever it is, glucose or temperature or viral count, whatever it is, and that's coming to me, and I can now help that person prescribe by telemedicine. Well, telemedicine is a really new thing. Now, is telemedicine reducing the number of doctors? No. Is it reducing the number of nurses? No, but it is certainly changing the technical skills and some of the psychological skills necessary in order to operate within this, service industry we call medicine that's beginning to be automated. Um, and here's the bummer: we're all going to die. Um, uh, 10 years ago, which is like yesterday, come on, it's not that long ago. Um, I would have also put low there as well. In fact, I used to put low there as well. I've had an interest in this future of work stuff for a long, long time because we just, our whole, and again, I'm going to use this term automation just as an easy way to say everything in the broadest possible sense, right? But, thanks to automation or advanced algorithms or whatever you want to call it, symbolic analysts now are in just as much danger of losing jobs as coal miners or factory workers. Um, today's coders are yesterday's coal miners. Um, coding has become so routine that AI programs now just code and replace coders by coding themselves automatically. So, so what used to be considered, a very highly skilled and safe, well remunerated type of work, programmers, a, a lot of these programmers are finding themselves replaced by, ironically, programs. And a lot of programmers are today, again, they're sort of yesterday's factory workers. So, so, you know, no set of skills, and I'm going to focus on the technical skills, no set of technical skills today is going to guarantee that you'll have a job, a career, even looking out 5 years. I mean, look, during my life, I have not, I'm not going to tell you I've had X number of jobs because what is a job, right? What is a job? I worked as an economist. And what did you do? Okay, so forget the jobs. I've had at least 4 or 5 radically different careers, and and not because I planned it that way. I had a career as a young entrepreneur in Honolulu, Hawaii, by the way. Great place to live. I grew up there. So I was an entrepreneur, and then I ended up doing had a government career. So I had a business career, and I had a government career, and I had an academic career. and then I had another business career. Um, and and these are really sort of shocking, brutal shifts. There's a big difference between the world of government, even though I did, research. There's a big difference between the world of government and the world of business. The psychological skill sets just are actually rather different. Okay, rather different. So so we don't want to think in terms of jobs. We want to think in terms of, or even industries. We we want to think in just terms of careers, if you will, or terms of, oh, today we have a certain type of market economy environment, but I can see that it's changing, and if I look out 5 or 10 years, I think I'd better position myself, given my psychological and technical skill set, to go more in this direction. I had sort of reached the end of my first academic career. Um, great university. Uh, I mean, I was the president of an institute and professor and blah, blah, blah. But I'd kind of reached the the end of, gosh, isn't this a really wonderful way to make a living? I guess, what's the term? Maybe boredom. Okay, I don't know, maybe boredom. And then suddenly, here came this opportunity to go to Ukraine, a country I never ever expected to visit at all in my life because it was part of the Soviet Union. And here's an opportunity to go to Ukraine and not create a business, but to help create an entire industry, the valuation industry, and then be the first company, which we were, and the first appraisers, which we were, and jump in and get that uh, get that we call it the first starter advantage, right? You're the you're the first one into the market, so you make a big economic profit. But then through time, other firms enter the market and the economic profit goes away, and you now have what we call accounting profit, which is small competition. So nothing I did in my academic career prepared me for my Ukrainian valuation business career. I mean, they were just totally, totally different. Um, the key, and I'm going to end up on this here real quick. The key, of course, is I didn't know this about myself. I discovered through time that I'm actually a very resilient and adaptive person. That's the best part of my psychological skill set. I can jump from American academe to Ukrainian business madness of the 1990s, and and prosper in both places, and in both radically different places, radically different businesses, and just activity, right? So the point of that is, I didn't know when I was 20 uh, how adaptable, how resilient I was, because 20 years is not very much time to discover that. But after about 40, 50 years of life, it occurred to me that, gosh, my best skill is I'm adaptable. I'm resilient. I keep going. I fail forward. Okay, I get better. I'm adaptive, and that understanding that about my psychological skill set has allowed me to jump into other types of activity that I would not have, sort of been willing to do before. Okay. But I just had this confidence that, oh, look, you know, just jump in. I'll figure out how to swim. I've done it before. And try as just as fast as you can to develop that same feeling. And that's one of the main reasons you go to a university, by the way, because you're going to be challenged with exams and stupid stuff and smart stuff and all the pressure of grades and but after you do this for 4 years, which is probably what 20% of your life or something, right? um, at the end of the degree program, you will know that you're resilient, because working at something for 4 years requires resilience and courage. And you'll also know you're adaptable because, even though, for example, you may hate statistics, turns out you did it and you're good at it. Wow, that's great. I didn't realize I was good at statistics, right? I just realized I didn't like it. So, this kind of, I don't know, soft, squishy psychological stuff, it's just so important, and you can't capture it in textbooks and specific classes. Okay. um Going forward, you got to stay relevant, right? It's not just you being really adaptable, but it's like, okay, I have to stay relevant, because if I'm relevant, I will have opportunity, right? If who I am in terms of the things I do are, my skills are relevant, then no matter how the economy changes, you know new technologies and businesses dying and new businesses coming, and you know one day we're not in the European Union and the next day we're in the European Union, and that'll be a really radical paradigm shift. um, but if you stay relevant and you stay focused on who I am, then you'll be able to kind of ride out the storm that's not coming. It's here already. Um, okay, I'm going to throw these four up, and then I'll apologize in advance for telling one last personal story, which I hope that God will be relevant to the points I'm trying to make. We'll see. Um, Now, this is just, again, it's just me talking. This is what I've kind of learned and taught myself. Okay. Um, I'm just going to put all four of these up, let you read them. First of all, I do have to apologize for the four C's. I don't know how that happened. Look, as you go through all your textbooks over the next 4 years, you're going to run into the three C's and the four C's and the five P's. And I don't know why it always works that way, but anyway, um, let me tell a personal story, with apologies, and see if my example makes this make sense. So I get out of graduate school, and I have, at this time, okay, at this particular time, I had advanced degrees in economics, and I specialized, whatever that means, in environmental economics and international trade, but mostly environmental economics. And I couldn't get a job because it was a recession, and I was desperate. I wanted a job. I needed a job. Rent, food, cool idea. So I get offered a job by the United States government to help create and run a new special research organization, whose job, whose purpose, right? We all have a purpose, whose purpose was to study the international supply and availability of 32 critical minerals that the security services in the U.S. military were really interested in. This was the Ronald Reagan days, and So this was all kind of like national security stuff, but it was minerals economic research, and I got hired to be the head economist, right? Go out and do this, Paul. Okay, the problem is that I didn't know anything about mineral economics. Mineral economics and environmental economics are radically different things, you know. Uh, so I was modeling fish populations with huge IBM 360 computers, and now I'm supposed to study chromium and platinum and all of these minerals all over the world. I don't know anything about mineral economics. I didn't tell them that, by the way. I sat quietly while they offered me the job and said, "Sure, I can do that, and we need you to do that. I can do that." Um, and I knew I could, even though I didn't know how. I just knew I could somehow, right? So, and I'm leading now a team of scientists. And these scientists are geologists, mining engineers, metallurgical engineers, because I understood that, okay, what's the production function of the minerals industry, right? Production functions. Well, you got to find it. That's a geologist. You got to mine it. That's the mining engineering. You got to do some kind of processing. That's the metallurgical. And then we had to be able to tell the military, the CIA, and these guys at what cost can South Africa supply chromium for the next 50 years, because no chromium, no jet airplanes, no jet airplanes, no military. So so I realized that I just got lots of problems here, um, because I don't know anything. And with hindsight, I realized that was probably one of the few smart thoughts I've ever had. Um, Rather than concentrating on what you know, when you have a task, when you have a purpose, concentrate on what you don't know and then go fill in the blanks. So the first thing I did is, remember, this is 1980, so no desktop computers yet. I got my first one 1981 because I'm a scientist. Yeah, right, but no internet, no chat. So so first thing I did is I read mineral economics textbook. And because I was, by pure luck, close to a very high quality university called the Colorado School of Mines, I went and sat in on mining engineering classes and geology classes, not because I wanted to become a geologist mining engineer, but because I understood that I needed to have a working knowledge, just a working knowledge of geology, mining engineering, metallurgical engineering, because how could I organize these scientists to work on a project if I have no idea what they do, how they do it? Okay. So I developed, what I called a working knowledge. The learning mineral economic was the multi-skilling. All right. That was the multi-skilling. All right, you understand basic economics. Now go get some specialized knowledge in mineral economics. I developed a working knowledge in these other disciplines, and I stayed interconnected because I went and joined all of these different engineering geological societies. And I started, writing little economics papers for them, teaming up with geologists. And okay, that was fun. But that was the cooperative part and the interconnected and the multidisciplinary part. Um, and of course, we had it went beyond that, because 1980 we had IBM 360 computers, mainframes that were, just as the old legends say, they were as big as a building. And there were no algorithms, there was no software, there was no models. So we had to figure out how to design the methodology for explaining, how much chromium there is in every country, how much can they produce, what's it cost. And we had to figure out how to program that first into a huge mainframe and then later into a mini mainframe and then a third time into desktop computers. And that required all of us to be really versatile and adaptable and very creative because we invented methodologies that had never existed before because nobody had ever said, oh, okay, let's figure out everything there is to know about the economics of the chromium industry worldwide. And when finally Ronald Reagan decided he wanted the military to do that, they just in a very unsophisticated way grabbed a bunch of people with, who titles like geologist and economist, put them all together. But we had to figure out, how to create teams. And I learned very quickly that the psychological is more important than the technical. Okay. So so that's my personal example of how I kind of sort of lived my way through this idea of staying relevant. Okay. Um, After I left the government, several years I did some consulting in the mining industry as I went on to be a professor. But then it kind of disappeared. I haven't done anything in this industry now for longer than I care to think. But if a really compelling opportunity came to me today, like, really compelling opportunity to do research in this area again, I'm completely sure that I'm versatile enough and adaptable enough that I can get myself upskilled and multi-skilled and right. I can just jump back into the game. And that that's the self-confidence that just comes from just doing all of these things and being successful. All right. I gotta I do have to throw this in. Um, um, this concept of failure, right? Because I'm a person and I do some work and I fail. Um, because we put, I believe, far too much emphasis on the entrepreneurial skill set, okay, as opposed to other skill set. You'll hear a lot of people say, don't be afraid to fail. It's okay to fail. Failure is a badge of honor. And to that I say, oh, baloney. Failures, failure is not good. Failure's bad. Unless, this is the key, unless you fail forward. You fail forward, which means you learn from your mistakes, you adapt, and you go on. And so if somebody says to me, Paul, have you ever failed in your life? I'll say, no. And they'll say, you egotistical guy. What do you mean you've never failed? I'll say, whoa, whoa, whoa. I have not failed. I have failed forward. Okay. I've 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 gone out and done something and it just didn't work out, but I identified what did I do that was successful, what did I do that was not successful, okay, and I adapted and I went on. And as long as you never stop, right, you never stop, it's impossible to fail. I'm really serious about that. You cannot fail if you never stop. You can fail forward 1,000 times because the key word is not fail. The key word is forward. Okay. The very first time I testified in the High Court of London on a case where I'm the financial valuation expert, I failed forward. And I didn't just fail forward in a normal way. I failed forward in a brilliant, catastrophic way. I mean, this was one of the best failing forwards of my life, okay? Which is to say, I lost, we lost, the good guys lost, the bad guys won, and that kind of sucked. But I sat down and I encourage you to do this all the time. And I said, okay, Paul, you didn't fail because you're still getting hired to do this kind of work, so people still trust you and they think you're smart and reliable. But what did you do wrong? And that was painful. Okay. And I identified what I did wrong. And then I went and I took these expert witness courses, and this was in Britain, run by ex-judges, ex-prosecutors. And you know what I discovered? This is why I keep beating the dead horse of psychological skill set. What I discovered from analyzing my own beautiful failing forward, okay, what I came to understand is I failed psychologically. I mean, I answered every question that you know barrister, as they're called, from the other side was asking me, and I responded to all of his insults and all of his insults, and by the way, did I say insults? Okay, so because it's a pretty brutal process. Barristers are not nice guys. I failed psychologically. I went back and read the entire several hundred pages of transcript because I testified for several days, and I could not find anything really obviously wrong with any of my answers. But the judge just poo pooed me because I violated the protocols and the behaviors and the words and the nuances, the procedures and culture of the British court system. That was the first time I testified in Britain. And I made a bunch of diplomatic errors. That's why we need to study diplomacy in economics. I made a lot of diplomatic errors. I made some cultural errors. I forgot that when you are asked a question, you have to look at the judge when you answer the question. Well, I didn't know that. And sadly, I didn't prepare myself better in advance. And so by not answering the question to the judge and always referring to the judge as your honor, your honor, your honor, okay, your lordship, I'm sorry, your lordship, okay, I was creating some diplomatic faux pas. And even though my arguments for valuation were much stronger, which the judge admitted, hey, he just didn't find my testimony very helpful, blah, blah, blah. And so, I failed forward. This, the next case I did was exactly the opposite. I concentrated on understanding what I don't know. And what I understood is I don't know how to be an expert witness in the British cultural sphere, this very special world of judges and prosecutors, the way you sit, the way you look, the way you talk, and what you say, and how you say it. And don't forget it's your lordship and your lordship. And I worked on that really hard and really seriously. And then the next case, boom, hit it out of the park. And so, that's, I don't know if that story is helpful, but that's a story about failing forward. Okay. I wasn't embarrassed for failing. I wasn't proud that I failed. This idea, well, failure is a badge of honor. Nonsense. Don't wear failure as a badge. Just never fail. Right? Don't ever stop, and don't ever stop adapting. And you gotta look at yourself and say, okay, Paul, you really screwed up. Let's figure out what you did wrong and fix it. And I did, and then we had a happy ending. Okay. But the last thing is the most important takeaway. And swear to God, this is the last slide. Know yourself. We talked about that. Your psychological skill set, your personal technical skill set, and then always behave ethically. I was never so happy as when I read the professionally speaking, as when I read this judge's report in the PrivatBank case, where I was uh, 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 part of a team, to help the national bank, PrivatBank, recover these billions of dollars that previous owners had just stolen. And the reason I say I was really happy is not because the judge agreed with all my theoretical points about economic obsolescence. Okay. And which is one of the reasons we won the case. Okay. Because I convinced the judge that, okay. So it wasn't these technical issues. It was when the judge started throwing shade at the other appraisers. And the shade, not just that their work was not competent, but where he really took issue is that their work was not credible. Their testimony was not credible. They just didn't appear to be honest and ethical, independent specialists. And not just the valuation specialists, but other types of specialists. And when I read that, it made me really happy because I said, oh, great. All of this focusing on ethics, it really does matter. Because the severity of the judgment was not just based on, technical, me and others winning technical arguments. The severity of the judgment had a lot to do with the fact that the judge had a very strong feeling that people were not being credible, they were not being ethical, they were not being honest. And the judge didn't say it really direct like that. The British are much more subtle. Okay, an American judge would have said it, but when you read it, it's really obvious that he had those issues. So in this case, one of the reasons I was able to earn money on this case is because my ethical behavior was never, my credibility was not called into question at all. Even the other bad lawyer didn't dare question my credibility. And so, building that up is a reserve. And you know what you can do with a reserve? You can sell it. And so one of the reasons I can earn more money today doing this kind of work is not because I have a good track record. He lost once, he won a couple times, like a football player, but because in all the cases there's there's the the diplomatic assertion by the judge that I'm a credible person that can be believed, and therefore I'm useful to the court in making a decision. And in each of these other cases, it was the opposite. And so, I get paid now. I can now ask, for more money. Why not? For profit business. And one of the reasons I can ask for more money is the clients know the judge is going to like you, Paul. He gonna like you. You're credible. You talk too much. You're credible. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that. Behaving ethically is a very good profit maximizing strategy in the long run. Okay, I'm going to leave it there. Um, we don't have anybody to manage us, um, so we'll sit here and see who's managing us. Nobody. Okay.
Yeah, I see Marina have a question. Please go on, Marina.
Oh, great. I love questions.
Yes, Mr. Dot, hello. I have a small question. Maybe it is kind of a stupid question, but I have it. So you were talking about like in-person jobs or symbolic analysis jobs, and you said that our like sphere is more to symbolic analysis, but would you consider like an human resource department jobs, especially recruitment, is a more symbolic job or a more in-person job? Because these people manage like all the human resources in companies, and they are more like in-person people. And I have a question to which.
Super. Um, there was a time that nobody got hired for any job, I think safe to say, without an in-person interview. And that would generally be maybe with others, but it would always ultimately be with some human resource person. But you see, we've automated a lot of that now. We have these companies like Indeed and so on and so on. And and so an employer will say, well, I need a person who can do X, Y, Z. And then, the algorithm comes back and says, here's two resumes. Um, I think that's just an utterly disastrous industry. Okay. Because what's the employer going to do? They're going to say, I need an accountant, not just. I mean, I don't need just an accountant. I need a cost accountant. I need a cost accountant. And so then the AI program comes back with someone who's cost accountant. But again, you don't hire people, you don't build teams just based on the skill set. I mean, technical, you got that psychological skill set, and you're never going to get that from a resume, right? You're never gonna understand that Paul talks too much from his resume. You got to meet him face to face, okay? So there is some, that's kind of an in-person service, but it is getting automated. The issue with human resource management is how the function is defined. And one of the big problems we have with corporations is we define the human resource function to basically be, I'm here to defend the interests of the company, period. And so the human resource function itself needs to be greatly, I don't want to say reformed, but greatly evolved and changed so that it becomes more in person. It becomes focused more on human development than just, this is the policy of the company, right? Blah, blah, blah. So, and I think, by the way, I get the feeling that because we've kind of gone and are going a little too far on the sort of non-human activity way, automation. I think it'll start to swing back the other way. I think there's a great future in what we now call human resources, but only if that function is radically changed to be not human resources on behalf of the corporation, which is a piece of paper, but human resources on behalf of employees, so that technically, psychologically, they're being nurtured and enhanced. And I think we're coming back that way. A number of companies I know owned and operated by friends and relatives, and they operate that way. They operate that way,